Okay, so maybe let's announce our topic for today.
Absolutely.
What we are going to talk about?
Last time we talked about the nature of truth. Today
Yeah.
we're going to talk about the nature of freedom, or better said, the question, what is freedom? I believe that is the question that, again, a lot of people have posed in recent times and throughout history. It's a very complicated one. It's pretty difficult to define what freedom is per se.
Yeah.
And as always, I will most likely give you or give the audience a brief overview of what this topic is about, the concept of freedom, and then we'll get into the details. You can dive into it after that.
Okay.
Sound good?
Okay.
Excellent. So, in short, the concept of freedom is, per definition, the power or the right to act in a certain way, to speak or change without any particular restraints, meaning that you're not restrained from being mobile, be it physically or mentally, for that matter. There are different types of freedoms. You can basically use the concept of freedom for any sphere, for that matter, be it freedom of speech, expression, political freedom, economic freedom, personal freedom, religious freedom, being autonomous, and so on and so forth. There are many more that you can come up with. Those are just some that I've brought up because those are some of the most popular types of freedom. Freedom is also a very valuable principle, a valuable concept for many, or for virtually all types of civilizations. People even die for it. People believe in that value of freedom very much. Even dictators value freedom. But again, this is a question that I was going to ask you later, how people view freedom from each type of lens. Um, Freedom is also very difficult to maintain. In other words, freedom is also, as for example, I like the philosopher Thomas Hobbes. He said that freedom, I think it was in his Leviathan work, if I remember correctly, meaning that freedom is pretty difficult to preserve, namely that we are dominant seeking creatures for the sake of self-preservation.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, we seek to control power over others. And through seeking solid, or through consolidating power, we also seek freedom. And this is where the tricky part becomes, what actually freedom constitutes, or how we view freedom per se. And also, therefore, war is also another act of a natural condition of humanity, because war is fought over many things, and alongside of that, freedom as well, for example. So, in brief, what I just said, everything, freedom is a very, let's say, elastic type of term. And for that matter, I would like to now get into the details, dive into it. What is for you freedom? How would you view it?
Um, what can I say? I think that the concept of freedom and the freedom like philosophical category is one of the most complicated categories in the philosophy at all.
Mhm.
It is very broad. It differs from historical period to period. It differs depending on what culture, what type of society, maybe, uh, or where and when it appears, where and who are thinking about the freedom, who are talking about the freedom, who maybe who wants to have it, or and so on, so on. It is really one of the broadest and the most complicated concepts in the philosophy at all. Mm, but if we want to know, or to have some more and less straight and clear understanding what freedom is, maybe we should start from the history, of different ideas of freedom. And if we look to these historical different situations, maybe we can see, or we can find different episodes when different people in different historical periods had and posted a question, what is freedom, and can person be free? In order to answer this question, we simply need to understand what is the concept of freedom, as I said. So it is, speaking about that, it is worth to note, for example, that in antiquity, when those people, antique people, talked about a free person, what freedom meant for them. It meant, frequently speaking, for them, it meant that to be free is not to be a slave, firstly, and freedom was thought as a political freedom, as a priority right of any citizen, yeah? And a citizen is always free, and in the same time, he is not free individually, yeah? He is free as a citizen of the polis, in opposition to others, to those who cannot control themselves, and those who cannot take part in creating the laws by which citizens live in polis. Yeah. So this ancient or antique citizen was a subject to the will of others, whereas to be free means to have his own will. For for antique people, for ancient Greeks, yeah, the concept of freedom was understood or meant simply to be free in political sense, and to have an opportunity to use their political will to create laws and to have some influence on the life of the polis. Yes. So yeah, maybe you want to add something about Greeks, about ancient times, or maybe you have another point of view about that, maybe. So what can you say?
It's very interesting. Very good points you brought. You started from the Greeks, or you started from the ancient times, but I believe it started even earlier when we were nomadic people and we were basically roaming the areas back and forth, and we had sort of like, constrained territories that we would mark every time that we have settled in, and then the next couple of months we would keep moving forward. And I think from there on, the concept of freedom started to kind of arouse, namely through the idea that people want to remain autonomous within their clan or within their tribes. It all started from being tribal, right? Freedom became very important for them, or from that type of point of view. Of course, later on, freedom, or the concept of freedom, began to evolve, as you then said, in the Greek times or in the ancient times, and not just only in Greece, but also in ancient China. The idea was also being talked about in other civilizations, in Mesopotamian era, and so on. And for what I can say is that, yes, freedom was oftentimes correlated with political freedom, namely being either a slave or a free man, a free woman, a free citizen, in other words. And for that matter, the hierarchical structures also began to develop in their own ways. For example, in the Spartan times, if we're talking about now the Greek states, the Spartans had a system of 3 different types of people. Let's say you had the Helots, you had the Perioces, and you had the Spartans, right? Spartans being at the top, the military-aged men having all the rights and perhaps even being granted to the council. Then you had the Perioces, who were, let's say, artisans and sculptors, ordinary citizens who weren't military-aged, or I mean, who weren't military soldiers or any of that sort. And then you had the Helots, who were basically the slaves, who were basically adopted or taken over by the Messenians when the Spartans conquered the Peloponnesian Islands. And for that matter, the idea or the concept of freedom began there already to develop, for example, and it meant a lot to every person. I mean, rightfully as a slave, or in other words, Greece, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but Greece was about 80% slaves and 20% actually free people.
Yeah,
and
right.
only men got to vote or had the right to vote in democracy. Women were not allowed children anyways. So it was a very different type of freedom that they viewed. And I would say this was a very prototypical type. And for a very long time, this kind of remained the same throughout our history, right? In the medieval times, we had the feudal systems, also a little bit of a different type of hierarchical structure there. And you saw that people only really began to think about liberty, liberalism, classical liberalism only appeared, let's say, in the 17th, 18th century, when that really began to spread, right? With Jean-Jacques Rousseau, with many other French philosophers, especially. And that's how all the revolutions began to emerge: the American Revolution, the French Revolution. The ideas began to really take its roots, right? But for a very long time, of course, Christianity dominated, or well, I'm now speaking for Europe, for that matter. Here in Europe, Christianity dominated our lives for most of medieval times, and even there was a different concept of freedom, what freedom meant.
That's right.
And freedom also meant to remain disciplined within the doctrine and to follow orders, to follow the scripture, to follow all the norms and customs, and then you can remain free or be a free citizen. If you step out of the lines, then that becomes very difficult for the individual if you get out of line with any particular doctrine. And this is then also a question: who gets to decide what actually freedom constitutes or what the rules are? But I believe that's a little bit of a different question here. But to stay on topic, freedom is, in short, or to answer your question, freedom already began very early on, from the primitive ages, and simply took its launch all the way up to today. That's to answer your question.
Yeah, Alex, we have some questions here.
My apologies, didn't see it. What was the influence of Christianity on freedom?
Stop. The first question from Christiusha, is it a particular theory?
The particular theory was freedom attributed.
Was freedom attributed or taken away by birth? You mean you're asking about the Greeks, as far as I understand, yeah? About
as far as perhaps I understand, was freedom attributed or taken away by birth?
For Greeks, yes. For antique people.
It's kind of difficult to interpret that question, but if I want to play around with the question, the Greeks. You mean that if freedom was a given right from birth or taken away by birth? How do I interpret that? Do you maybe understand? Or Christusha, would you like to maybe elaborate more on the question? It's a little bit not clear for me or for us. for that matter. Because
maybe if I and if I see things clear in this or from this question, we can say that the freedom attributed by birth for only for those people who are from noble families. Yeah, that's in this case we have people that have the freedom by birth. They shouldn't do, or they should do nothing about to take some freedom. They simply have it because their fathers, their grandfathers, and so on had this freedom. They were citizens of the polis, and they should do nothing about that to take this freedom for themselves. If you meant in your question this part of question, or this part of problem of issue, maybe something else, I don't know. As speaking about ideas of Greeks about freedom, these ideas were very different from subsequent ideas. And if we approached to the ideas of Christianity, to the ideas or to the period maybe of the Middle Ages, they were the Christianity really influenced the concept of freedom. And here we have an opportunity to answer your question, Risyusha. What was the influence of Christianity? Yeah, I can start. Yeah, Alex.
Of course, please.
Okay, so the problem of freedom here reaches a completely different level of understanding within the framework of medieval philosophy, which is associated with a different understanding of God. Here we have a new concept of God, yeah, and the Christian God being the absolute creator of the world, being opposed to the world, or in the language of philosophy, transcendental in relation to it, in relation to the world. Yeah, and God turns out to be free, absolutely free, turned out to be free to the world. He's free in relation to the human mind. He was free, or is free, in relation to the man at all. That is that this is freedom in the limit, in the absolute limit for man, for every man, yeah, which does not exist within the framework of ancient thought. During ancient times, there wasn't any idea that posed some обмеження, ограничения, limitations. Yeah, thanks. Limitations for man. Yeah, ancient Greeks didn't thought about some limitations of freedom, only by political or civil status, citizen or not citizen, citizen or slave, and that's all. Very this situation is absolutely different in medieval, absolutely different because of the concept of Christian God. It is clear also that in this sense, it is impossible to talk about person as free in the Middle Ages, but the question arises of how close a person is to such divine freedom. So we have like an absolutely free Christian God and absolutely not free man. What were the questions that appeared in this case? Is the man is free in moral sense, or is he free in terms of moral action? Since here the problem of freedom turns out to be connected with responsibility. Yeah. If a person is not free, then how can he be punished for his sins? Since he is not the actor who performs this action of his own free will, like God do. Yeah, God is absolutely free, so maybe he is the only creature that has had absolute responsibility, like absolute freedom. Yes. So if the man or some man in medieval is free, then his freedom finds itself in competition with divine freedom. So in this case, we have man and God on the same level, but the different philosophers of the medieval didn't want to do this comparing. Yeah,
This
they
comparison.
couldn't pose a man on the same level with God. So within the framework of Christianity, one of the possible approaches to understanding human freedom is that this freedom is the freedom only to choose evil. A person doesn't have sufficient strength to choose the God they thought, but at the same time, he has or had sufficient freedom to deviate from the good. To deviate from the good. He is capable of rejecting divine grace, but is not capable of achieving divine complicity, divine co-creation himself without the help of the other people or institutions.
May I?
So,
Uh-huh.
yeah,
I'll start.
that's it.
Yeah. There's one question, or now two questions. I would like to just briefly go to the other new question. So if Christianity helped the religious people get freedom, why does religion restrict so much? That's a very good question. And I'll answer first, and maybe if you have something else to add, please do so. We have to understand why even religion came to existence. I'm not going to now spend too much time on theological principles here, but in short, religion, or the idea of religion, was to sort of formulate a social contract amongst others. Meaning, in other words, to set, like, to pose a set of rules for society. And that includes a lot of ethical, moral rules and laws that people should behave. It is a system of behaviors. In other words, how man and woman should conduct their lives appropriately. Of course, there are further nuances and little details that come into play as well. But the biggest ideas or biggest principles is morality and ethics that come into play when talking about religion. And because of that, because we know how, let's say, how naive or how susceptible we are to evil, we have to restrain ourselves in some way or other. And therefore, the existence of religion came into being. So, for example, before religion, or before any, let's say, religious doctrines, people, I'm not sure if it's fair enough for me to say that we were just pure chaotic cannibals. Perhaps we were at one stage, we definitely were, and then we began to acquire moral principles. This is the whole development of morality, after all. I think Nietzsche had a good passage on that. I don't remember exactly, but I think animal became man, and man became aware of the laws of man, and that's how morality began to evolve. But in essence, we have to kind of restrain ourselves from doing certain things because we are very prone to evil, or we're very prone to flawed things in the world. And then, of course, the question then also becomes if we're even suited for freedom. In other words, are we even meant, or could we handle a lot of freedom? Because with freedom there comes a lot of risk and sacrifice as well. So there's also then the question, how far or how much should we restrict ourselves? If we were to have absolute freedom in its most literal understanding, absolute, I'm pretty sure the world, or at least the society, the civilization, wouldn't really function exactly the way we would want it to function after all. So therefore, any religion, any, let's say, spiritual doctrine needs to put a set of constraints upon man. That is my interpretation of that question, or that answer for that matter. Perhaps you would like to add a few ideas or a few comments on that.
Maybe I'd like to add something. I saw here was the question about why are priests treated the same as God if man in general can't, and so is a means of control. Religion is a means of control. About speaking about this, why are priests treated the same as God? Because they, especially in the medieval, they were recognized as bearers of sacred knowledge, divine revelation, which is not available to any ordinary people. So that's why they always were treated, and even now very often they are treated like God. I don't know, but we have to remember that what religion is, and what is religion. And here we come to another answer, another question. Religion, what is religion? Is it a means of control? Yes and no in the same time. Firstly, religion, in my point of view, is a type of worldview, historical type of worldview, and it means also that religion, any or every religion has a potential to be only like a worldview, and it has possibilities of control, possibilities of management of society, for society. It could be used in state or public management, in politics, and many other situations. Really, a religion is a very powerful thing, and at the same time, it, as any powerful instrument, it could be used for some good things, like space, that is very important in our life, and also in bad things, to make people angry, to make them willing some wars, conflicts, creating some problems or issues about worldview and so on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Here, yes, Carrie knows in the background. Yeah, it's from my camera because I live in Ukraine, in Mykolaiv. Here is air alert. It's no, I do not need to seek shelter right now. Hopefully, here it's more or less safely. Thank you. So maybe you want to add something about religion, Alex?
Religion, to answer the same question, whether priests or why priests are treated the same, if wait, I just need to find the question. Why are priests treated the same as God? Here, I wouldn't really necessarily say that priests are treated the same as God. The same, it's a little bit of an overstatement in my opinion or my interpretation. We can take the same example as, you know, the Pope being treated as a god standing on earth, so to speak, right? And because of that, eventually Christianity broke up into Protestant doctrines and evangelics and Calvinists and all these other little fractions that kind of aroused because of the dissonance within the Catholic community, so to speak. So I wouldn't really necessarily put that question in this little way, but rather try to understand why priests are seen very high. And yes, again, as you said, priests or any particular medieval scholar of any particular educational background certainly had authority and a level of power to be heard or to be seen, because he was, first of all, literate, he could read and he could write. And a lot of people, a lot of serfs, a lot of peasants, farmers didn't have that type of access to education back then. So of course, in that sense, they were seen as very divinely people, if you want to put it that way. And therefore, they were kind of seen as gods, but again, not exactly as what we would want to like understand it. So I think in short, religion dominated also people because education was highly restricted, meaning there was no freedom of education. And when you restrict freedom, when you restrict information or the flow of information, then you consolidate much more power. And this is something what I said earlier in the beginning. Freedom, or the idea of freedom, is a power or right to act, speak, and change without any restraints, be it physically or mentally. And the mental part is, from my understanding, then the whole process of having the freedom to educate yourself, to see things, to feel things. If you don't have those types of rights as well, then you also lose immediately power, or you hand over the power to someone else. We can take any particular example from this world too, but I'm sure a lot of people in the audience understand those examples. So that is all I have to say for the concept of freedom regarding Christianity or religion in general. And yes, religion does restrict a lot, but this also leads to my next question, so to speak, or my next little part, which then, you know, there's been a lot of talk or a lot of debate, well, at least when I was growing up, or in general in the philosophical literature, the idea or the debate between maximum security and maximum freedom. It's a very classical question to ask, you know, to anyone really. Maximum security or maximum freedom, like what do you choose? Do you rather want to live in a very secure place or in a very free place? I'm not sure if you've heard of that comparison before, but I certainly did. And I believe this question is not exactly correct, in my opinion, because you're taking two wide extremes at the same time. Maximum security to me is practically prison, and maximum freedom to me would be a wild forest. with a lot of unknown things. And we, as human beings, we seek a little bit of both. We have one foot on the safe side and one foot in the other unknown territory, the known and the unknown territory. That's how we kind of function. We always test the water with one foot, not with 2 feet, usually, unless you want to go with 2 feet immediately. But I'm not sure. Do you want to maybe talk about that a little bit? Why this concept or why this comparison even exists, and what people are trying to understand from that?
Maybe I would like to add something about how the concept of freedom changed in the modern society, modern world. Yeah, we can say that in relation starting from the 20th century, the understanding of freedom was or appeared in two aspects or in two interpretations of freedom. And this is, for now, like different philosophers say, is extremely productive. Now, this approach belongs to the Isaiah Berlin, maybe you know this English philosopher, yeah, English philosopher of 20th century. And Berlin spoke about two understandings of freedom, and he distinguished negative freedom and positive freedom, or freedom from and freedom itself. Simply freedom. So what did he mean about that, or what he wanted to say with that? For example, negative freedom, in this case, it doesn't have sorry,
what would you like to say?
In this case, negative freedom is not having a negative character. Yeah, it's not having negative character. Here is we can understand it as freedom from any limitations. No, not having a choice. No, negative freedom is a freedom as freedom from any limitations. When we talk about freedom, it means that no one else interferes with our choices, and that's it. We are free in our action, in self-determination, and again, this means, like Greeks thought, political freedom. While freedom for is the freedom of possibility of action, realization. For example, we are free from, in the case when the law does not prohibit us from a certain action, but at the same time, we may not have the means or the opportunity to carry out the action that is not prevented by law. Yeah. Freedom. Freedom for is at the same time associated with obligations. There is no opposition between freedom and duty here. Another aspect of understanding freedom is the extent to which our choice is free, not only from external circumstances, but also from ourselves. To what extent, for example, can we think of our own judgments, our volitional choice as belonging to us, to me, to you, to maybe specific individual, to a specific person, yeah, and to what extent is it conditioned, for example, by my or your biological nature.
Mhm.
Thus, we come to the problem of the subject, namely, who is the actor in this case, and what does freedom, for example, mean for me in relation to me as a biological being. That's it.
You have a question for you regarding negative freedom.
What question?
You wanted to say maybe that negative freedom is not having a
Yeah,
choice.
I already answered that. That negative is
That's
not
Mhm.
in this point of view.
There's one more question above. Maybe I'll answer that. Why do you think women aren't given the same rights and be as free as men from the philosophical point of view?
Okay.
That's a good question. I wouldn't actually necessarily say that all women of all societies had no rights or no particular, access to.
Sorry, Alex. What historical period are we talking about now? About women rights?
I believe throughout history,
Yeah,
if I
around
understand
history.
correctly.
Yeah, that's right.
Throughout
I think
history,
that from the starting of maybe starting from the ancient times, women didn't have any rights mostly because they even in the most cases women weren't uh, or weren't thought like human being at all. Am I right?
I have a little bit of a different perspective, and I do agree with some of the things you say, but there were also times where women did have actually the right to education, for example, in the
When and
Viking
where?
Age.
Okay,
For
sorry. When and where?
example, I can give you an example. The Viking Age was a time where the the Viking Age society gave
Uh-huh.
women the right to own land, for example, to also study. I think the first university was in Iceland, in Hólar. That's, I think, in north of Iceland. Women had the right to study there. The women had the right to land, property. They also had the right to divorce their man at any given time. But again, those are just some of the little or small examples throughout
Mm-hmm.
history. And yet, I do agree that throughout history, women weren't, let's say, seen as equally to man on many different levels, especially the political level.
Mm-hmm.
But I also wouldn't say that women were entirely treated very unjustly. I believe back then, the ancient people, the medieval people, again, going back to the religious doctrine, their own worldviews, at that period of time, they had a different outlook on how the gender roles should be worked out in that sense. And because of that, oftentimes nowadays we have a different worldview or a different perspective on how people should be treated. So for every given period of time, they had their own idea and their own understanding and perhaps a form of or a level of acceptance. But if we're talking about in general why women weren't seen exactly to be equal as men, it's a little bit of a, how would you say, it's a very elastic question and a very elastic answer in the sense that, again, there were times where women did have certain rights or even had the opportunity to dominate certain areas or to be leaders. But again, that was a rarity that didn't exist too often. But again, we can't really make that as the general rule or the general answer
Mm-hmm.
for that matter. So yes, in general, women did not have the same rights or views or power as men, primarily because of the patriarchal idea in religious scriptures, for example. In other words, in Christianity, right, uh, it's often written that woman must submit to man and God.
So we
And
have, sorry, so we have a logical question here. So what happened next that it changed? Yes. So what happened? Why women
became free.
became free, or why
Mhm.
they have got freedom, rights? Yes. What
Mhm.
has
No, no, I get it.
happened?
From my historical understanding, we can already perhaps
Not
start
free.
when,
Sorry, not free. You are talking about. You are asking about rights. Yeah.
if we're talking about, so I'll perhaps just still answer what happened next, assuming that this was the question, you
Mhm.
know, like what happened, what suddenly
Yeah,
made
yeah. We're talking
us change.
about rights.
Mhm.
About
Mhm.
rights. Okay.
So, like I said, we can perhaps already start at the time when the Reformation already occurred. The Reformation in 1517, when Christianity became reformed in some ways or many different ways, things began,
So,
not
sorry,
just for,
sorry, Alex. I would say, sorry, I'm interrupting you, but maybe it's better to say that the period of enlightenment, yeah, happened
that happened after the Reformation. That's when
after, because
science began to bloom.
Reformation didn't give
Yes, yes,
for women nothing. They gave nothing for women.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Uh-huh.
That's
Okay.
that's yes, that's not my point I'm trying to make. I'm just trying to kind of find the starting point for when things really began to change rapidly. Because after the Reformation, you are correct in your analysis that not just the idea of liberalism began to grow, but also the idea of emancipation for women. The scientific community began, or yeah, let's say, began to really grow rapidly because there were less and less restrictions for them. Because throughout history or throughout medieval times, scientists had to work within the Christian or within the Christian confines, correct? And after that, once the Reformation happened, a lot of things, a lot of different institutions began to ease up in their religious teachings, and that gave a lot of institutions, a lot of people the opportunity to actually begin to explore in science and start thinking about the ideas or the liberal principles, think about those kind of ideas, right? And what changed? I began women, I
Yeah.
think, already in the ninth.
Education became available, and women began to actively fight for their rights, take part in political parties, movements.
Activism.
So
Hmm. Exactly, 100% correct.
that's it.
And therefore women got their let's say achievement, and thus became free and independent, had political power, or have the ability to participate in politics. And that's what I can say from a Western European or from a Western world point of view, because that's not everywhere the case. If we look at some Islamic countries, for example, theocracy still reigns, and women, for example, in Afghanistan still don't have that, or not, or in like any other particular countries that have theocracy, where religion dominates. So that is,
Mhm.
in short, the answer to the question. Now, I'm not sure. I thought as at a certain point people were given away into marriage because of land or power, family, not really because the
But not
women wanted to
because
do it.
women wanted to do it or had any choice. Yeah, I think that you're right. That's right. Even I can even add for your statement that in most countries of modern world, women only gained their rights only in the middle of, or in the beginning or middle of the 20th century. And as far as I remember, maybe Alex, you will correct me, Switzerland was one of the last countries that gave women rights, yeah?
Correct.
Maybe in 70s or 80s of 20th century, yeah? Or something like that.
Correct. Switzerland was for a very long time, let's say, one of the last countries in Europe where women did not have the right to vote. And the first election on whether women should have the right to vote was in 1971. And the last canton, because Switzerland has 26 cantons, 6 half cantons, and the last half canton was Appenzell, which is located in northeast of Switzerland, which is also seen as one of the most perhaps conservative cantons in Switzerland. And that happened in 1991, where they legalized the right for women to vote.
Yeah.
So therefore, Switzerland was a little bit laid back compared to America, Italy, Germany, and other countries of Europe.
Yeah.
Something that isn't oftentimes talked about in Switzerland actually gives them a sense of guilt, I would say.
Okay, so choice and freedom seems like a new concept. No, it's not a new concept. It's a quite old concept, because our freedom, and or not our freedom, but in generally speaking, freedom and choice are very joint, interconnected things. Yes. We can say that we have some freedom when we have a possibility to choose what to do or to avoid doing something, yeah. Or, and on the contrary, if we don't have any choice, what freedom we are talking about? But here we can start some other different things to think about narratives, manipulations, about our own, whether this choice was critically produced with our own mind, or it was influenced, yes, by some forces, political parties, propaganda, yeah, and so on. So do you think nowadays we have more tools to be free, like money, for example, or freedom has always been the same? Okay, maybe you want to answer, Alex.
I would say in some ways we do have more possibilities, or we have more tools to be free. In other words, primarily because of education. I believe education is a very powerful tool in order to become free, right? Knowledge is power in its truest sense sometimes. And again, power is not always correlated with freedom, but in that sense it is. And because of the access we have to practically a lot of things, if you live in a free Western world, or in any other free country where you have internet, where you have libraries available to you, where you can openly and freely read all sources, all different types of views, and so on and so forth, then naturally you will become freer in your mind, first of all. And once you become very free in your mind, then you can also learn how to acquire money, which again, money does buy you some level of freedom in some way. But again, money is not everything. There's, I think, a topic we once talked about money, or regarding happiness, but I'm not going to get too deep into that. But like money, for example, or freedom has always been the same. I would say we definitely, in earlier times, in early ages, we definitely had less freedom, and only a tiny minority of people had, in this true sense, freedom. Now, if you want to compare the average person today living and the average person living perhaps 200, 300 years ago, we would be considered to be living very, very nobly, meaning in terms of the things we own, the things we possess, the knowledge that we have, the capabilities, the skills that we nowadays acquire. Those are some of the things that even the kings 500 years ago could not even imagine.
Mhm.
So just to compare how much more freedom we actually have today, how much freedom to do things, how much freedom to exercise, to express ourselves, personal freedom, religious freedom. We don't have to worry about being persecuted. Again, depends which country you live in, but in the most parts of the world, we don't have that type of persecution anymore, at least in the Western world, as far as I'm concerned. Hopefully it will never happen, but to just get to the point again back, we definitely live at a very high standard of living in that sense. So yes, in that sense, we definitely did acquire more freedoms throughout the history.
But I have another question. How can we measure the level of freedom? What criteria to compare that today we have more freedom than 100 years ago? What are the criteria for this? How can we measure freedom by what?
We can measure freedom by how much we can do. I think there's a quote, I don't remember who said it, but it was something like, if you say something that angers your authority, you know who's in control, or something like that. I'm paraphrasing that quote, but the idea is that if you express yourself in a way, and the authority, and again I'm putting the authority in parentheses because it could be either the institution, the government, or any other party, so to speak, and criticizes you, or let's say suppresses you, then you know who is in control. And I think we can kind of measure based on how much we are restrained nowadays. And by restrained, I mean how freely we can express ourselves in many different ways, be it education-wise, be it politically, be it what we can say, the freedom of speech, and so on and so forth. And so therefore, it's a very tricky tool. It's like asking, how do you measure happiness? You can maybe try to prove it on a chemical level, but you certainly cannot, like, yeah, speaking of freedom, Instagram is restricting us from talking more than an hour, but we're going to read
free. Where is freedom? There is no freedom in Instagram. We can't talk more than 1 hour.
Yeah, but okay, we are gonna recap soon. We're gonna finish up.
Yeah.
Just to finish up my thought here. So going back to how we can measure freedom, it's very difficult. It's very, and like I said, it's based on how much we can do things up until the moment where someone or authority has to come and stop us. Then we realize this is the end of how far we can go, or how much freedom we actually can have. And compared to what we can do today, and if we were to exactly do things we want to do 500 years ago, for example, I'm pretty sure there would be much more restrictions, much more limitations, and so on and so forth. That's how I would kind of answer the question. It's very difficult, but perhaps you have a better explanation to that. Unless there's nothing more to add.
In the end, ending all our conversation, let's make a conclusion. What is freedom then? Kristyusha is asking us about that. Based on what we discussed, what is freedom? So what statement or what meaning we can propose?
Derive from what we've discussed today. Yeah. Freedom is the ability to move, to express yourself, to act in a way where you are not necessarily limited all the time. And their freedom also comes with obligations. It comes with a sense of reasoning. It comes with a sense of understanding what your limitations are or ought to be. Meaning, if you cannot act in a bizarre, absurd, obnoxious way to the point of doing literally everything, freedom is not to be understood as absolute. Because if we were to understand it as absolute, then I'm afraid there would be a lot of negative consequences in any society, in any civilization.
Yeah, freedom is not a self-will, yeah?
Exactly. It's and freedom also requires, let's say, a sense of duty, making sure that you respect other people's individual freedom without harming anyone for any self-interest reasons, put it that way. But at the same time, freedom is also very necessary to flourish in a society, to develop and to grow, not just individually, but also as a nation, as an economy, because that in turn also allows people to grow individually. So it is a sense of, let's say, it is a sense of mutual benefit for everyone. As long as everyone cooperates in a way that is beneficial to society, more freedom will occur. In other words, within reason and logic, of course, within the rational understanding of how far you can go. But at the same time, it's also necessary to note that we need restraints because we are by nature inclined to commit a lot of unnecessary acts. And a lot of people need to have a moral, ethical foundation in our society to function properly. That's how I would conclude in short. Perhaps you would like to add anything, conclude in your own words.
Maybe I'll only add for your statement that freedom is the ability to choose and to act in accordance to some obligations, in accordance to some rules, in according to the law.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. Because in some other cases, I have very big doubts that we will have something else, that we will have this clear freedom in the meaning of constructive freedom, yeah. Which is not a self-will, which is not some kind of manipulation, which is not some kind of illusion using which some forces wants to enslave people, wants to make them do that they want from them to do. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because if people will fall into the illusion that they are free, they can do and think very paradoxical things, like in Orwell, the war is peace, the slavery is freedom, and the ignorance is a knowledge. And they will just believe very, very strong in that all absurd things. So freedom is always the ability to choose and act in accordance to the law and obligations. And we have to be more educated, maybe, to learn to learn how to think critically. Due to that, we have to how to say it,
What would you like to say?
We have to know whether or is some ideas is ours, or whether some
Mhm.
some maybe willings, some willings is ours, or they were made uh, for us, so we can think that they are ours, but it was some other person who created all these things, and just how you say that, um, they put only these ideas, they put this stuff in our heads, in our mind.
They enforce, yeah.
Yes.
I think that's a good way to conclude, and I would also add that the more critically thinking the country is, the freer it is in the end.
Yeah,
that's about it.
Okay.
So if there's any other questions or comments, statements, very interesting live, had a lot of questions answered. We'll be tuning in next week. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you for all the questions.
Thank you for your questions too. Слава Україні, героям слава, смерть ворогам. Дякую, що ви приєдналися до нас. Very thanks that you have joined us today. Yeah, I think that next week we will have another live stream. If you have some proposition, some maybe ideas for our stream, you may write. Так, і вам також дякую. You may send your propositions, your ideas to Alex or to me in direct, and we will find out something about that.
We'll see what kind of topics are suitable for us. Correct.
Okay.
Always free to ask or to propose any questions, any subjects that you like. Of course.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It was really interesting. Yeah, it was really interesting, Christiusha. It was very cool questions. Thank you. Thank you. Take care.
All right. Thank you very much for your time, Vova. Appreciate it.
I appreciate it too, Alex. Take care.
Take care.
Take care. Bye. Till next
Goodbye. Till the next time.